Was the first and a crucial, important movie in the history of science fiction, I think, and in the history of science fiction film.
Alors, en vous regardant, peu de vous étaient nés en 1956 quand la MGM a fait ce film, mais c'est un film très très important dans l'histoire de la science-fiction et du cinéma de science-fiction.
This is the first movie which takes place entirely on an alien planet, light years away from Earth, which we never see Earth. It's the first movie in which we see human beings going to the stars in a starship that they themselves designed rather than an alien ship.
C'est la première fois, en fait, c'est le premier film dans lequel on voit des humains qui se passe entièrement sur une planète à des années-lumière de la Terre. On ne voit pas du tout la Terre. C'est la première fois qu'on voit des humains prendre un vaisseau spatial qu'eux-mêmes ont construit et non pas des extraterrestres.
Science fiction, of course, has a long history. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the work of Jules Verne, perhaps with H.G. Wells. But in the 1920s in America, Hugo Gernsback launched Amazing Stories, the first science fiction magazine, which was a pulp magazine. And science fiction, through Amazing and its successor magazines like Wonder Stories and Astounding Tales of Science Fiction, became associated as a pulp genre, an adventure genre, not serious, kind of B-level fiction.
Donc dans les années 20, quand la science-fiction a commencé à vraiment prendre son envol, grâce à des magazines comme Amazing et d'autres, c'est devenu populaire, mais en même temps c'était considéré comme quelque chose de pas sérieux, c'était de l'aventure, c'était du pulp, comme on dit en anglais.
It was not even a particularly popular pulp genre. There were other genres like westerns and mysteries, and even early kind of superheroes like the Shadow and the Spider. Their pulps were immensely more popular.
C'était même pas les plus populaires des genres dans le pulp. Il y avait les histoires de super-héros avec The Shadow, par exemple, les westerns, tout ça, c'était immensément plus populaire que la science-fiction.
But after the end of World War II, some interesting things happened. World War II ended, of course, with the explosion of atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And suddenly we found ourselves in the atomic age.
Les choses ont changé à la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale qui s'est terminée par des explosions nucléaires au-dessus de Nagasaki et Hiroshima, et soudainement on se trouvait dans l'ère atomique.
At the same time, television sets began to proliferate, a new entertainment medium which threatened movies, and suddenly movie attendance began to decline, and more people were purchasing television sets.
Et c'est aussi à cette époque qu'il y a eu l'apparition des télévisions, il y avait de plus en plus de télévisions partout, et donc ça faisait moins d'entrées au cinéma.
One of the things that was threatened by television sets, in addition to movies were hurt by television, radio, drama was almost killed by television, and the pulp magazines, which had been the common man's entertainment, was hurt by the growth of television sets. Most of the pulp magazines died out. The Western pulps, the mystery pulps, like Black Mask, which had been a giant one for decades. The Shadow stopped publication, the Spider stopped publication. All of these things, the romance pulps went away. One genre of pulp survived, science fiction pulps.
Et avec l'apparition de la télévision, ça n'a pas seulement fait du mal au cinéma, aussi à la radio, au théâtre, et aussi justement à ce qui était un peu considéré comme un des trucs pour tout le monde, c'était ces pulps justement, et beaucoup d'entre eux ont disparu. Le Shadow a arrêté d'être publié, toutes ces choses ont disparu, les westerns aussi, mais la science-fiction par contre a continué.
At the same time, in the early days of television, one of the most popular types of television shows was the science fiction show. It began with a show called Captain Video, which was a 15-minute show that was done live all over America, 5 days a week. 5 original live Captain Video shows every week.
Donc à l'aube de la télévision, un des genres à la télé qui a vraiment marché, par contre, c'était la science-fiction justement. Dès ses débuts, il y avait Captain Video qui était en direct à la télé 5 jours par semaine.
They did hundreds of Captain Video shows, most of which did not survive, sadly, because they were live. Only a few kinescopes remain. But the show was so popular that Rangers, there was Space Patrol, there was Tom Corbett's Space Cadet, there were science fiction shows on every channel. there was my particular favorite, Rocky Jones Space Ranger, which is one of the few that survives because it was done on film.
Et évidemment, avec le succès de Captain Video, il y a eu beaucoup d'imitations, plein d'autres séries, dont son favori Rocky. What's the title?
Rocky Jones Space Ranger.
Rocky Jones Space Ranger. Et là, il en reste par contre parce que c'était tourné justement en pellicule.
All of this, the fact that the science fiction pulps were surviving when other pulps were dying, and the fact that the science fiction TV shows of the early 50s and late 40s had been so popular, convinced the studios that maybe science fiction was a coming genre. And maybe they should, and they had been turning out some science fiction films for a long time, but they've been low budget films for the most part, B films, as it was called in the parlance of the studios. Now MGM, the premier studio, the biggest studio in town, decided maybe the mood was right for an A science fiction film, a major science fiction film done to the highest standards of quality.
Le fait que les magazines de science-fiction avaient toujours autant de popularité, la télévision également, ça a convaincu les studios que peut-être il y avait de l'intérêt dans les films de science-fiction. Bien sûr, ils en faisaient déjà depuis un certain temps, mais c'était vraiment des petits budgets, des films de série B. Et là, la MGM s'est dit peut-être que ce serait le moment de faire un film de série A.
The result was Forbidden Planet, the film that you're about to see, originally titled Fatal Planet.
Et le résultat, c'est donc Forbidden Planet, que vous allez voir dans quelques minutes, qui était à la base appelé Fatal Planet.
When you're starting for an A-level project, one of the things you want to start with, of course, is your source material, your idea. And they started with the best. They started with Shakespeare.
Donc quand on veut produire un film de série A, quelque chose de très bon, évidemment, il faut avoir un bon sujet, une belle histoire. Donc ils ont commencé avec ce qu'il y avait de mieux, Shakespeare.
Because, I don't know how many of you know Shakespeare, but what Forbidden Planet is basically a science fiction retelling of The Tempest, one of Shakespeare's latest and, in some opinions, greatest play. You'll see in here, you'll find the wizard Prospero in the guise of Dr. Morbius. You'll find Ariel, his obedient servant, in the guise of Robbie the Robot. And you'll find Caliban in the guise of, well, that would be telling.
Donc pour ceux qui connaissent Shakespeare, vous remarquez ici que c'est The Tempest, la tempête, je présume, une de ses dernières et meilleures œuvres selon certains, et vous retrouverez vraiment tous les personnages là-dedans dans ce film. On ne va pas tous vous dire qui c'est.
You'll of course find the scientist's beautiful daughter, the equivalent of Prospero's daughter, and the sailors who become shipwrecked on the island, Prospero's island, or in this case, the Altair 4, and throw everything into chaos and create the events of the story.
Vous reconnaîtrez la belle fille du scientifique, qui est la fille de Prospero. L'île de Prospero, ça devient justement cette planète.
Even if you haven't seen the film before, you'll find some elements of it familiar if you've watched other science fiction films of the 50s and television shows of the 50s. Robbie the Robot, who was one of the great stars of this movie, and indeed is one of the stars at my Jean Cocteau Cinema, because we have a full-size replica that we use to introduce our films. Robbie was at the time one of the most expensive movie props ever created. Best robot ever seen on film. It cost $125,000, and believe me, in 1956, that was a lot of money.
Donc même si vous n'avez jamais vu ce film, vous reconnaîtrez plein de choses que vous avez déjà vues dans des films de science-fiction des années 50-60. Robbie le Robot, qui est une des grandes stars de ce film, mais aussi une des grandes stars du cinéma Jean Cocteau, où il présente les films. Et c'est vraiment le meilleur robot qui a jamais été vu à la télévision. Il a coûté à l'époque $125,000, ce qui était énorme en 1956.
Robbie was so popular that after Forbidden Planet, he had another starring role in a film called The Invisible Boy. And then he went on to a long career doing guest shots in things like Lost in Space and other Twilight Zone. He's in a half dozen Twilight Zone episodes. He's in 2 Lost in Space episodes where he's the villain fighting the Lost in Space robot, which was made by the same guy.
Et puis ensuite, Robbie le Robot a eu une belle carrière après. Il était le premier rôle dans un autre film, Le Garçon Invisible. Ensuite, il était dans quelques épisodes de Lost in Space, aussi de Twilight Zone. Et puis, justement, il a joué le méchant dans Lost in Space, dans 2 épisodes où il combattait le robot gentil qui était aussi construit par le même homme.
As for the human cast, some of you who may not have seen this before may be a little taken aback by Leslie Nielsen in the lead role. But believe it or not, Leslie Nielsen was a dramatic actor and quite a decent dramatic actor before he became the cartoon character of the police stories.
Donc, par rapport aux acteurs humains dans le film, vous serez peut-être étonné, certains d'entre vous, de voir Leslie Nielsen dans ce premier rôle dramatique. Mais en fait, à l'époque, il était d'abord un acteur dramatique, même un assez bon acteur dramatique, avant de devenir cette espèce de caricature qu'on connaît de la série Y a-t-il un flic pour?
Jack Kelly, who plays Lieutenant Farmer, would later go on to greater fame playing Bart Maverick in the very successful and long-running American TV Western Maverick, starring James Garner as Brett Maverick and Jack Kelly as his brother Bart.
Jack Kelly, qui joue le lieutenant ici, après a eu une longue carrière dans la série Maverick, en jouant Brett Maverick, justement.
And Altera, the scientist's beautiful daughter, of course, would go on to be Honey West, and it's Anne Francis, and she would have an incredible career in television and film for a long time, but this was her first major role, I believe.
Et Altera, la magnifique fille du scientifique, justement, elle aura une magnifique carrière après ici, beaucoup de magnifiques rôles, mais celle-ci, c'est son premier rôle.
Now, you have to, of course, regard this film in its time. Obviously, you guys have all seen Avatar, and you've seen the big budget movies of modern days, and this may look primitive to you, but believe me, for 1956, they hadn't seen anything like this, and I hadn't seen anything like this when I went to the DeWitt Theater in Bayonne, New Jersey, to see this film when it first came out. The special effects were absolutely state-of-the-art. In fact, were beyond state-of-the-art. The entire thing was filmed on a soundstage in Burbank. There's no outdoor shots in it whatsoever. The robot was the most realistic-looking robot I'd ever seen. I've spent a long time trying to decide really it was a robot or not. It actually wasn't. There's a man inside. But it's a little less obvious than with other robots of the time.
En regardant le film, il ne faut évidemment pas oublier qu'il était fait en 1956. Maintenant, vous avez tous vu Avatar, les gros films de science-fiction, les gros films à gros budget. Mais à cette époque, ça, c'était vraiment la pointe de la technologie, même au-delà de la pointe. Quand il l'a vu pour la première fois, il était halluciné par ce film. Il regardait le robot en se demandant si c'était vraiment un vrai robot. Mais non, en fait, c'était comme un homme dans un costume.
The other thing is, that although Isaac Asimov was not involved in this and received no credit and certainly no money, you can plainly see his influence on the film in that Robbie is, I think, the first screen robot to be guided by Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. You know, he obeys orders, he protects his own existence, and he cannot harm a human being or other sentient creature. And this was very unusual in science fiction. Before this, like, robots were always turning on their masters. And the robot as slave analogy had been part of it ever since Karl Kapek's original RUR and Moxon's master. And it's like, you built a robot, sooner or later he would kill you. But Asimov put that to rest in print, and Robbie, I think, finally put that to rest in film.
Isaac Asimov a absolument pas travaillé sur ce film, il n'a pas reçu d'argent, rien du tout, mais on voit clairement son influence. Robbie le robot, c'est le premier robot à l'écran qui utilise les 3 lois de la robotique, c'est-à-dire il obéit à ses maîtres, il fait pas de mal à ses maîtres, et puis... Jusqu'à en tout cas, on voyait les robots qui justement se retournaient toujours contre leur maître, comme des sortes d'esclaves, mais ici c'est la première fois, après qu'Isaac Asimov l'a mis sur papier, c'est la première fois que c'est sur celluloïd. Ridicule.
The spaceship, the main spaceship here, the C-57D, like Robbie, had a lot of use after this. You'll see it used again in many other Twilight Zone episodes. Twilight Zone was made by the same studio that made this, so the spaceship, which was quite a large model, and Robbie were both hanging around a lot for years and were available to be used again.
Le vaisseau spatial, tout comme Robbie, a aussi beaucoup été utilisé par la suite dans les épisodes de Twilight Zone, par exemple. C'était d'ailleurs le même producteur qui faisait ça. Donc le vaisseau spatial et Robbie étaient là dans les studios et utilisés très souvent.
I talked a little about some of the members of the cast, but the most important member of the cast, I think, is Walter Pidgeon, a classically trained and established Hollywood character actor who had done a lot of Shakespeare and who brought a great dimension to the role of Dr. Morbius. And you know, you see this film. If you see this film in 1956, you make this natural assumption that Morbius is like the evil mad scientist and that the robot is going to be the monster and is going to attack people, and none of that turns out to be true. The things are much more subtle and nuanced than that, and that was so refreshing to me when I saw it. Even though I was only a kid in 1956, I'd read science fiction, I'd read comic books, and so much of it was so fucking stupid. And here at last was a smart thing, a show that was exciting and thrilling and yet made sense to me. These people did not seem to be idiots.
Oui, il y a aussi, on n'a pas parlé d'un des acteurs principaux, Alistair Pidgeon, qui lui avait fait beaucoup de Shakespeare, c'est un grand acteur, et il joue ici le scientifique, et à première vue, on pourrait imaginer que ça va être tous les trucs classiques, le méchant, savant fou, qui veut conquérir le monde et tout ça, mais non, ça n'a justement pas pris ses facilités. C'était la première fois qu'il voyait quelque chose de différent. Jusqu'à là, beaucoup d'histoires de science-fiction étaient juste finalement assez débiles, et c'était la première fois qu'il y avait quelque chose d'intelligent.
There are two sequences in here that the tour of the Great Krell machine that has influenced so many science fiction things since. It'll evoke other things to you, from the Death Star, the interior to Death Star, to the big machine in J. Michael Straczynski's Babylon 5, to numerous other things, and it all dates from the Krell machine that you'll see here. And also, of course, the attack through the energy beams. Disney lent one of their top animators to MGM for that, and you just see the monster for a minute, but it was an electrifying minute for all the kids of my generation.
Il y a aussi deux séquences magnifiques, par exemple le tour de la Krell Machine qui a été repris dans plein d'autres films de science-fiction depuis. Vous l'avez vu dans Star Wars avec la Death Star, vous l'avez vu dans Babylon 5, et puis aussi la séquence avec les rayons laser qui a été faite grâce à un animateur de chez Disney. On voit très vaguement le monstre, c'était vraiment magnifique à l'époque et ça a été beaucoup réutilisé.
Another tremendously innovative thing that Forbidden Planet did, is you'll notice, is the soundtrack, which is these electronic tonalities, as they were called, not a conventional soundtrack. Nothing like that had ever been done before either, and even to this day, I can tell if I'm in the house and someone has Forbidden Planet on. You just hear those sounds, and it's like nothing you've heard before, nothing you've heard since.
Autre grande innovation, c'était la bande originale du film, qui n'était pas de la musique comme d'habitude, c'était des tonalités électroniques, comme on dit. Et même encore aujourd'hui, si on l'entend n'importe où, les images, il sait que c'est Forbidden Planet tout de suite, c'est reconnaissable.
Forbidden Planet was a successful movie on its release. It got generally good reviews and did pretty good box office, but it was not a huge hit. And that was unfortunate because MGM had put a lot of money into it, a lot of promotion in it. They thought that this science fiction was going to be the new thing, the thing with which they could combat television, because they could do big things like this and television couldn't match it. But it didn't pan out. It did okay, but not enough that they wanted to make more. So unfortunately, after this experiment with a big budget A-level science fiction film, MGM and the other studios retreated from that and made science fiction B films again, pretty much for another 12 years until Kubrick broke the mold once again with 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Le film a eu du succès à sa sortie, il a eu des bonnes critiques, il a fait de l'argent, mais malheureusement pas du tout l'immense succès auquel ils s'attendaient. Et donc après ça, ils ont eu un peu peur de se lancer dans des films de science-fiction A, les studios MGM et les autres, ils se sont dit non, on va recommencer à faire plutôt des films de studio B. Et c'était à peu près ça, donc pendant les 12 prochaines années jusqu'à 2001, Odyssée de l'espace de Kubrick.
If you look at this film today, though, you can tell that it was simply ahead of its time, because an enormous amount of modern science fiction comes out of Forbidden Planet, including, and most particularly, Star Trek. You watch this movie, you watch the tubes that they go in when they come out of hyperspace, and you say, there's the transporter. You look at the function of the crew, you know, all those earlier shows I was talking about, Rocky Jones, Space Ranger, and Captain Video, and Tom Corbett's Space Cadet, they always had these like crews where there would be like the captain and a comical sidekick and a girl and a little kid. That was the spaceship crew. Forbidden Planet broke that mold.
Et en regardant ce film aujourd'hui, on se rend vraiment compte qu'il était en avance sur son temps. Il a tellement influencé de choses, notamment Star Trek, vraiment quand on voit les tubes dans lesquels ils se déplacent, c'est les transporteurs de Star Trek, et aussi l'équipage. Jusqu'à là, dans les films de science-fiction, généralement, il y avait le capitaine, il y avait le rigolo, il y avait le petit gamin et la fille, et ce film a changé les choses.
In fact, if you look at this movie, you can see the genesis of Star Trek a decade before Gene Roddenberry. I mean, Star Trek had a number of characters, but it was built around the triad: Captain Kirk, Spock, the science officer, and the doctor, Bones. Here, once again, you have a triad: the captain, the first officer, the doctor. They've changed things around a little because the doctor is the logical one here, and the one who's the space wolf, as they say, going after all the girls, is the first officer, not the captain. But it's still the basic same triad. And the whole structure, the military thing, the spaceship going out to solve problems, it's Star Trek. When Roddenberry pitched Star Trek to the networks for the first time, he called it Wagon Train to the Stars, citing a very popular Western at the time, Wagon Train. But it wasn't Wagon Train to the Stars. It never was. He never delivered that. What he delivered was Forbidden Planet. The things jiggled a little. And of course, the rest is history. We all know it comes from Star Trek. So I'll stop talking now and let you actually watch a terrific movie here. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. I watch this movie every year, and I have Robbie, the robot, at my theater to remind me of all the dialogue.